Welcome in to CyHawk Talk here on a Sunday, looking back at a resounding dominant Iowa win over Wisconsin and a second consecutive loss for the Cyclones. Have the Hawkeyes returned to the top of the Iowa football mountaintop? Just seems like maybe, 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, we were talking about where those two programs were at in relation to each other, with Iowa State seeming like they were on the upper edge of that, upper hand of that. And man, what a difference a month makes. Ben, how are you doing this evening? You bounced back from a disappointing result at pickleball this evening.
You can't win them all. Coach speak cliche. On to the next game. We're gonna get in the film room and analyze what went wrong in my pickleball championship defeat. But right now, we're talking about the Cyclones championship hopes potentially being gone after a loss to Colorado. Cyclones lose it 24-17. All of the one-score games are suddenly flipping against Iowa State. They've lost two in a row at Cincinnati, at Colorado, two games against teams that I think Iowa State fans should have told you that they felt pretty good. Going into, you would have certainly liked to have won both of those games. You bring up, when these teams played CyHawk, Iowa State was trending up and Iowa was trending down, Ethan. That's because, Iowa State's gotten away from the things it did in that game. Matt Campbell raised his hand afterward and said, "Hey, this was on me. The attention and the details were not good enough. We weren't precise enough. Too many mistakes. I think of the dropped passes. I think of the fourth down issues. I think of Iowa State's penalties. It's been bad these last couple weeks, and that's why we've seen these one-score games flip away, from Iowa State's direction."
It wasn't right on the pickleball court for you tonight, but you were right in the pages of the Quad City Times and on the audio channels of Cyhawk Talk before the season, where you kind of predicted that maybe it could be a bit of a step back for the Cyclones because of their success in one-score games. And it certainly seems like that is what's in store for them moving forward. What's next for the program, do you think? And is this going to be the new trend where they're maybe coming out as losers more often than not in one-score games?
Sure, a bye week helps. A bye week probably gives them a chance to make everything feel a little bit better. They'll be motivated going into it. Matt Campbell said Iowa State's going to use this week to get a lot of those details corrected. He has no other choice. Campbell said this isn't a good enough football team to win games without doing the little things right. Like the penalties and converting on third and fourth down. Iowa State was 2 of 12 on third down against Colorado. Way too many third and longs all night. And you bring up the big picture question of, hey, is Iowa State kind of in for a regression? Is this going to be a season where water maybe finds a little bit of its level? I predicted that at the start of this season, and that's not necessarily disrespect to Rocco Beck. That's just kind of a statistical question. It's so tough to win these one-score games. And I thought for the first three games, for the first, when Iowa State got off to a 5-0 start, I said they're proving me wrong. They're continuing to win these one-score games because they aren't committing penalties. They aren't dropping passes. Rocco Becht has been awesome on third down with Taylor Mauser. And those things have not been the case in these last couple games as the Cyclones have gotten defeated. So I'd offer, a little bit of encouragement after this bye week. They're going to get potentially healthier in the kicking game. That helps win one-score games. Iowa State was really limited in that respect, down to their fourth string kicker on Saturday. But I don't know if the competition gets any easier. Arizona State's coming into town. BYU's coming into town. At TCU, Ethan, is not going to be a cupcake game. KU, always a difficult team for this Cyclone football team. So, man, I don't know if it's going to get a lot easier. Iowa State has a 0.9% chance to reach the Big 12 championship and win it, according to ESPN analytics. I'd say, hey, if you have two losses in the Big 12, I think that has a pretty good chance of getting you to Arlington. So maybe the Cyclones are able to get hot and do it. That wouldn't necessarily surprise me. I think this team is still a good football team with some awesome players. They just need to start doing the little things right.
Plenty still to be hopeful for if you're a Cyclone fan, and you don't need to give up on this season already with two losses. Interesting that they have a bye week. Hopefully Matt Campbell isn't interviewing for any jobs in Pennsylvania during the open date. That's just me wish casting because apparently Matt Rule, the head coach at my alma mater, is the number one favorite for that job according to Vegas at the moment, and not really looking forward to another coaching search for the Big Red. But we don't need to talk about Nebraska today, even though I like to work it into every show. We'll talk a little bit about the Iowa win over Wisconsin. Last word on the Cyclones? Anything more you want to add, Ben, before I launch into the Hawkeyes?
I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the pass interference call, or should I say the pass interference non-call. That was the play that Iowa State fans and heck, media members and players and coaches probably look to as a big critical moment in this game where your tight end Benjamin Bramer was pulled to the ground in the end zone. Um, Intercepted on the play, an underthrown pass by Rocco Becht, and it got upheld after a conversation with the officials. The explanation Matt Campbell said he got eventually, not an immediate explanation, was that the contact occurred after the interception had been made, which deemed the play to stand. So that's the explanation Matt Campbell got. I don't think that was a good call. I think that changed the game. But at the exact same time, what Matt Campbell said is you can't let it be in that position. And that's one of those things that is going to make for a super long plane ride home and going to be one of those things that just goes the wrong way when you lose some of these one score games. The Hawkeyes didn't leave anything up to one play. Ethan, they looked good in their dominant win at Wisconsin. What were some of your takeaways from that game?
Yeah, you mentioned the talk of the game maybe being that missed call. I feel like that was what I saw most on X as I was getting ready to cover Iowa, Wisconsin. And I think what needs to be the talk about that Iowa win coming out of Wisconsin, getting a 37-0 victory over the Badgers, their fourth straight win over a rival team. You've had the Heartland Trophy, the Bronze Bowl, for a couple of years in a row now. And just about even that series, it's 49, 48, and 2 now. Iowa one win away from matching the Badgers. Interesting little race to 50 wins in the series here. But I think the number one takeaway is just how well the defense has played the last couple of weeks. Basically, since the second half at Rutgers, it's been pretty exceptional football from a group that feels like they're maturing right before our very eyes. Maybe a little bit shaky in the Iowa State game. Weren't able to get off the field when they needed to late in that one. Ultimately, Iowa loses that game on the Conradi field goal again, and then you can't say that they played poorly against UMass or UAlbany, but it certainly seems like this defense is really coming to its own and proven that it's a worthwhile successor and it's upheld that standard regardless of how maybe porous the secondaries looked or the lack of timely stops against Indiana. It certainly seems like this defense is turned into something here, and on Wisconsin, they proved that. Against Wisconsin, they proved that with their 3 first half turnovers, 2 interceptions by defensive linemen, and a fumble recovery by a defensive back on a pass that went backwards. So I think that's been really impressive. And I think that needs to be the number one thing that you're maybe hanging your hat on as an Iowa fan, or you're thinking about and smiling about, because it's like, man, we got a defense again. There were a lot of turnover, and boy, Phil Parker did it again. And it certainly gives you confidence going into the rest of the season. And I'll skip to my third takeaway with that segue too. You can't really count Iowa out of the Big Ten race anymore. They're in a tie for third place, I guess. 2 teams tied. Ohio State, Indiana tied, undefeated in conference play. A bunch of other teams tied with 1 loss. And Iowa doesn't control its own destiny because it needed to beat Indiana, and then it would be in control of its own destiny. But they certainly can give themselves a puncher's chance at being in that Big Ten championship game by winning out. You look at the remaining schedule, and the matchup against Oregon looks like the most difficult game, but fortunately you get that one at home, so that's certainly fortuitous. And then you're looking at Penn State. They debuted as a favorite, and that's a program, like I mentioned earlier, that is now without its head coach. They're going to be without their quarterback for the rest of the year. So that suddenly feels like an ultra winnable game in Kinnick next week. You feel pretty confident against Minnesota. USC looks like it's going to be a tough one on the road. Nebraska could be a tough one on the road. I tend to feel like Iowa seems like the better of the 2 programs there in that season finale game. And then Michigan State, they got blasted by UCLA this week. So you're feeling pretty good about the remaining slate if you're an Iowa fan. And so that was my final takeaway on Saturday was you can't count these Hawkeyes out of the Big Ten championship game. For as bad as you felt coming out of the Iowa State game and how raw it felt losing that Indiana game, you're still right there and you're still alive, which is all you can really ask for at this point in the season. I mean, just look at Penn State. I mean, they thought they were going to be national champion contenders, and they're virtually eliminated. I mean, it would be a disaster scenario if they ended up in the Big Ten championship at this rate. So you got to feel pretty good about your chances going the rest of the way. And then I think the final takeaway I'll mention, because I talked about it on Wednesday, I wrote a whole story about it last week too, was this wasn't supposed to be a spot for the Iowa running game to have a good showing. And they actually put together their best day against a Power 4 team all year with 210 yards, 4 touchdowns on the ground. Quite the bounce back performance. And I just, you can't understate how impactful that performance is, particularly against the number 6 rush defense in the country. And Kamari Moulton went to the podium after the game, and we asked him, when did you know it was going to be a good day on the ground? And he said, man, the first carry went for 5 yards. They went 3 and out. It was their second play. It was 2nd and 8. He gained 5 yards, 3rd and 3. Gronowski missed DJ Vonami overthrew him, and so they punted. So it was a pretty nondescript play, but Kamari said, I came off the field after that, and I knew we were going to have a good day on the ground, and that was just kind of a show of force from the offensive line against Wisconsin.
Yeah, if you rush for 5 yards every play, that'll get you a lot of places on a football field.
Yeah,
I'm curious to I'm curious to see, Ethan, if Penn State, if this firing of James Franklin, this changing of the guard kind of sends the Nittany Lions season into a tailspin, or maybe they get a little bit of that first game bump that we see some teams get with a new coaching staff. I'll ask you about that game. What are your impressions of what that game could be and mean for Iowa as you look back at their season thinking, man, the Hawkeyes are 2 plays away, 1 play in a CyHawk game and 1 play in the Indiana game from having a really strong resume.
yeah, I think that this Penn State game is really important because you almost feel like you can't lose to Penn State at this point. It would be like a really bad loss on it would be their worst loss on their resume if they were to lose to Penn State. And that certainly seemed like, as I mentioned a couple of shows ago when I made that bold prediction, I thought Penn State was going to be maybe the second or the most difficult win they were going to get. I thought they were going to lose to Oregon. I thought they would get the easiest win would be Indiana, and so then the harder of the 2 wins was going to be the Penn State game, and that seems like almost a layup at this point. And it's like, we might have more questions if they end up losing to Penn State. And you point out it's like, they might get that first game bump, and that's certainly what we've seen from UCLA. I think the big difference between what happened when UCLA moved on from Foster and when Penn State moved on from Franklin is, UCLA got to keep their 5-star quarterback for the rest of the year, and Penn State without Drew Aller for the rest of the year, and they're not quite sure what the succession is going to be. I saw some discussion that it might be a former Iowa prep star that starts for the Nittany Lions next week. We'll see who starts at quarterback for the Nittany Lions, but I think that you have to feel like a interim coach taking over for his first game in a pretty hostile environment in a night game at Kinnick Stadium. That's not a spot I want to start my interim head coaching career. So I think that it should lean Iowa's way directly on Saturday.
Put a bow on this one, Ethan. Any final thoughts looking back or looking ahead?
I mean, all things considered, I thought it was really important that Mark Gronowski played. Before the game, I was like, heck, you don't need to play him. If you think you can beat Wisconsin, which you absolutely can without Mark, don't play him, don't risk it. And then after the game, I kind of thought about it a little bit more, asked a couple of the guys how important it is to see a quarterback go out there when he's maybe not 100%. Like, certainly they're not going to put him out there if he's 50%, but the knee was definitely not 100% in that game. And I kind of asked him, like, what's it see to put for you to see a guy go out there and kind of put it all out there and be a warrior? And they said, man, Bryce Hawthorne, the South Dakota State transfer who got the first pick on the defensive line, he said, man, that gets me hyped up. And that Gronowski played through an injury last year at South Dakota State, so Hawthorne's had a little bit of experience seeing his quarterback go and lay it all out there. And we kind of had that theme throughout the year because he's a physical runner. And it's like, hey, to the offensive line, when he's throwing his body around like that, are you guys comfortable with that? Because it's your job to protect him. And they said, oh, man, that gets me fired up to see him lower his shoulder and just, blow up a defender. And so I think it was really important that Mark played and didn't, exit early and they let, Hecklinski take over when the game was well in hand 23-0 at halftime, but he continued to play into the second half and kind of salted it away. I think that was really big, and I think that could be a huge momentum boost and maybe a rallying point for the program.
Certainly a lot to look up for on Iowa's side of things with a massive showdown in Iowa City coming up on Saturday. Cyclones get a bye week at a much needed time to maybe fix some things and get their season back on track. They lost two in a row last year, and it was a pretty darn good season for the Cyclones. So we'll see if they can turn it around.
Welcome back into CyHawk Talk. We're going to wrap up the show today with some grades. Ben, go ahead and start us off with your 3 grades for the Cyclones against Colorado.
Look, I have to talk about these fourth down decisions by Matt Campbell. And I get it. When you're a head coach and you make a fourth down decision that's bold or something unique, people are going to remember it by how it works out. And Matt Campbell got burned twice on fourth downs. But I wonder what was going on in his head when he made the decision to go for 4th and 1 on his own 18-yard line. It was, 7 minutes, 13 seconds left, down 4. Cyclone fans know the situation. They know that's a situation Matt Campbell never goes for. I was shocked to see him hand the ball off to Abu Sama. Sama was hit in the backfield and stopped for no gain. He'd been averaging 7 yards a carry, so you can't fault the play call. But I thought it was maybe a moment where Matt Campbell was thinking about the flag that got picked up, and maybe his process got a little bit convoluted when he made that decision to go for a fourth down at his own 18. That one hurt the Cyclones. And I get being aggressive there, Ethan, but I'm gonna have to give him this D for the decision making with the pairing he made with some non-aggressiveness. Later in the game, Matt Campbell and the Cyclone offense have a 4th and 8 from the Colorado 47. They need a touchdown, and there's 3 minutes, 56 seconds left. And Campbell and Cyclones elect to punt, which was counterintuitive to the decision earlier, in my opinion, to go for it and be aggressive, especially considering the third down play call. On 3rd and 10, Iowa State ran a quarterback draw. Generally, that tells you 9 times out of 10 that an offense is saying, hey, you have 2 downs here to get this. After Rocco Becht was stopped for just a gain of 2, maybe Campbell rethought that, and he ended up punting. Cyclones don't get the ball back. So fourth down decision making. I'm sorry, Matt Campbell. You are what the results say you are, and I'm going to give you a D for Saturday. Continuing with a D, the details. Guys, another failing grade, and that's something that Campbell said in his post-game speech. He took ownership of it. It's on him. If you aren't coaching it, you're allowing it. And right now, Campbell said the Cyclones are allowing their details to not be tight enough. I think of the drops. I think of Rocco Becht missing his receivers that lead to drops. I think of the back-to-back false starts in the red zone. Iowa State's recipe to win these close games has been the details, and that's been lacking in their back-to-back losses. And because I'm a nice guy, I need to give Abu Sama an A. There was something to take away from this game, and that's maybe that Abu Sama has really started to take some strides as Iowa State's running back. No Carson Hansen. He's out with a concussion for the Colorado game. So it's all Sama all the time. And Abu's vision, I feel like, has gotten so much better. He's always had the breakaway speed. We saw that when he was a freshman, in the snow against K-State. And it's been the vision and the patience that's needed to come along to make Sama that kind of next level tailback. And I think we're starting to see that. So he goes off on the ground. 7.4 yards a carry, 177 yards, and 2 touchdowns. There is something to take away as a positive from the bye week. Those are Iowa State's grades. Ethan, what kind of a grader are you today?
I think I'm being fairly generous with the grades I'm handing out, but it was a 37-0 win, and you looked pretty good in doing so. I'll give quarterback play a B. Obviously, not Mark's best day, just over 100 yards passing, 1 interception, no passing touchdowns, 9 yards on the ground, 1 touchdown. This is the 6th straight game with a rushing touchdown. Every game as a Hawk, there's been a rushing touchdown from Gronowski. So nothing, nothing to hand out Big Ten Offensive Player of the Week to, or anything for that will put you in Heisman consideration. But all things considered, a big knee injury, able to work back within 2 weeks and start the game and play the majority of it, and kind of be the heartbeat of your team in a win. That's going to get you a B. And then I like that Jeremy Hecklinski got a little bit of action, so that's three quarterbacks who have seen game action this year. And for the first time in 2 years, it was three quarterbacks because you were able to, and you were leading games, so you're able to get some guys exposure as opposed to being forced to play three different guys because of injuries, like it's been for the Hawkeyes in the last 2 years. And then for the Doughboys, I'm going to give them an A because they've started making turnovers going into this game, -1 in turnover margin for the season. They got a nice +2, so they're in the black for the season now, +1 on the year. Uh, so it certainly seems like the defense is headed in the right direction turnover wise. And they always said that they thought that once they got the first one, it would be a domino effect, and it certainly has been since they got that first interception against Rutgers to seal that win. And then for the final grade, I'm going to give the ground game a B plus. Wasn't a perfect game, wasn't a flawless game, but it was pretty darn close, and it was their best game against Power Four competition all year. It wasn't as good as the U Albany game where they ran wild, but that was the kind of game you were waiting for from the ground game after last season. Caleb Johnson leading the way for a big time year, big record breaking year. It certainly didn't seem like they were able to capture that same magic this year. But to do what they did against number 6 rushing defense in the country, like I mentioned earlier, was certainly impressive and something to build on moving forward. That'll do it for CyHawk Talk here on a Sunday. We'll be back on Wednesday previewing the bye week for Iowa State and a real pivotal matchup for Penn State or for Iowa against Penn State in Kinnick Stadium. Thanks for watching.